Well, we'll get rolling because we promised you an hour-long conversation, and we're going to deliver it by gosh. So I'll get us started. My name is Kara Lowe. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the KC Tech Council. And I am so thrilled to have been asked to have this conversation with my friend Scott Ramon, who I've known a few years now, as Scott has served on our board, both when he was with TradeBot and now currently as CTO of NBKC, which is why you are all here to listen. And so Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Kara. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So I know we're recording this conversation, so don't panic if there's something you missed that you want to go back and listen in on. We'll send a link out after the conversation so that you have time to revisit or share it as needed. The other thing I want to make sure everyone on the call is aware of, we've got a Q&A function. If you look on the bottom of your, I have to tell you people how to use Zoom by now, but if you look on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. I've got a big old great list of questions that NBKC and I worked together on for Scott today, and I think they're terrific, but chances are there may be a stone that I've not turned over that you're curious about. So as I make my way through my questions for Scott, if you'll please use that Q&A function to submit yours. And toward the end of our conversation, we'll be sure to leave some time aside for us to get to those as well. I know we had a few sent in advance after us. I think NBKC sent out a couple emails about that. So we've got a couple to start us off, but we would love, love, love to receive your questions here on the call today. So I am thrilled to talk to you, Scott, about your journey to being a CTO, what life is like in leadership at NBKC, and certainly what life maybe has been like more recently in leadership, as things, as we all know, have shifted pretty dramatically throughout this strange year we're all living through together. At KC Tech Council, we have the privilege of getting to know a lot of chief information and chief technology officers from the companies that lead Kansas City, and I think they're not all cut from the same cloth, but there certainly are some kind of common threads in personalities and the kind of skill sets that leads one to become the top of their game in technology leadership. But I think it's fun to kind of start off by just getting to know you personally a little bit. So what are 3 words that you would use to describe your personality?
Sure. Well, I think, I guess I honestly, I'd be interested to hear what my team has to say about this, because, you're often kind of your worst critic sometimes, but I think that I guess I'd probably go with curious. I have sort of a nature of really wanting to understand systems and understand the thought process behind problems. And honestly, I think I have a tendency to be sort of uncomfortable if I don't understand something, almost like it's like a threat, and so for better or worse, I think what that ends up doing, honestly, is leading to some longer meetings than need to be, as I'm kind of drilling down in some area or something like that. But I think it's so that sort of really what I think of what I'm trying to do is sort of package up ideas in a way that my mind can interpret them, so that I can sort of pack them away instead of just having them flow through and then forget about them. So anyway, there's a curious nature, I think, to me. I think that probably what goes along with that is like an orientation toward detail. And that's probably common amongst a lot of technologists, specifically in the software realm, where you really have to pay attention to edge cases and overall correctness, and sort of provability, right? And speaking very precisely. So like a detail orientation, and then, I think depending on what sphere you're interacting with me, I think that there's a natural competitiveness to my personality as well. And again, it sort of comes out perhaps more in the business arena, where we're talking about competitors and we're really trying to be the best. as opposed to sort of in my personal friendships. But I think those three.
Trying to think if I've ever like played horseshoes with you or something. Potentially. Can confirm. Hey, and Scott's team, feel free to use the chat function to give us a thumbs up if he nailed that, or
Please do.
So no, I think that's interesting, and that certainly is something that we see, kind of interpreted over and over with folks that are in leadership roles for technology organizations, and especially in charge of software. I mean, I think curiosity leads to innovation. It harvests a lot of really great things out of a team. And I think, having a leader that kind of leads by the example of their own curiosity and their own innate, searching for how do we do this differently? How do these things fit together? How can I interpret this? I thought, that's super interesting. So how did these, kind of qualities kind of create that building blocks of your leadership style? How would you describe that leadership style?
Yeah, I think that my natural tendency toward being curious, like really often what I'm interested in doing with my team is discussing. So arriving at a solution, not by unilateral decree or from some position of power, but really just trying to be curious together. So like we might say, is this really the best way to solve this problem? What if we consider the fact that some people will be approaching our product from this perspective, or some people from this perspective, and so I don't like to arrive at a solution too quickly. I really appreciate a good dialogue and a good debate around things. So I think that it comes through with my team from a leadership perspective. And then, honestly, just like trying to be in a position where I'm honest about my own shortcomings and not necessarily assuming that that my way is the best. And so that kind of comes through, I think, as being more open, right? More open to critique and criticism and alternatives. But really value that kind of voice coming back toward me. And I think that I don't function well if I don't have that. So yeah, that's really kind of something that I value in my current team and something that I look for when trying to build out a team.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of understand why you're that way a little bit too, and what has led you to be that kind of leader. So I'd love to talk just a little bit, because I think there could be some folks here listening in today who haven't met you and are not aware of what your background is and what kind of led you into this role. So I'd love to talk a little bit about your career trajectory, and we'll get to that. But before we do that, one of my favorite stories you've told me is about a really impactful experience you had with a teacher when you were in high school in Northern Illinois. Yeah. Not necessarily a place where you think of as like a hotbed of technology leadership birthplace, but something that I think is so indicative of the important role that mentors play and teachers play and our early experiences play in leading us to the career path that we've chosen. So tell everyone here a little bit about that experience and kind of how it put you on track to go into computer science.
Yeah, that's right. I really had no exposure to software programming prior, but had a freshman in high school, had a math teacher. He's like a algebra, freshman algebra or something like that. Mr. Henderson. Mr. Henderson had a I wouldn't call it a hobby, but it was something where he wanted to put together a class around programming, and it wasn't very common. We're talking about 1996 is when I would have been a freshman in high school. And so we were just starting to kind of get to sort of modern age of languages and things like that. And so we started there was a class in Pascal, and it was like, like I'm not a huge fan of math in general, which is odd, I think, for someone who's done as much computer science as I have. But
it's important to know that that's not a prerequisite, because there are people that math is the big scary object in their way.
I'll tell you
They
what,
don't.
if you, yeah, it took a lot of work, right? So for some people, math
Yeah.
comes naturally. For me, I'm not that
Right.
smart. So it really took a lot of work and so it wasn't easy, I'll say that, but it definitely is
Mhm.
possible. Um,
Right.
and, and so, but, you know, you got all these sort of high school textbooks, but like there was this one sort of computer science oriented textbook that was definitely not written for high school freshmen, and but like it was like a page turner for me, and just so interesting how you know, loading this data into memory and then working with pointers and all kinds of things that this textbook unlocked, and so I kind of did almost like an independent study through that course, and then as we went on to sophomore, junior, senior year, stuck with it, moved on to like C++ and into Java, which at the time was fairly new as well. It wasn't new, but it was becoming more and more popular. And so by the time I graduated high school, I had 4 years of programming experience, which is very rare back then for someone graduating in 2000 to enter
Yeah.
into a computer science program and having this background, and really kind of gave me a leg up in college, I think, because I was coming in with all of this knowledge. And so this one teacher, this one math teacher who happened to have this interest and happened to put these classes together, certainly changed the trajectory of my life for sure. I would have had no real influence toward computer science other than that particular class. So yeah, it's a big
Yeah.
deal, and it actually, so you know, that's why I'm somewhat passionate about education and computer science today, and I really appreciate the effort that the Kansas City Tech Council has done in both Kansas and Missouri and the Kansas City area toward that end. And
Well,
personally,
that's nice
yeah,
of you to say. Yeah, but you've been a great advisor on that too. I know you've been with us to Apple's World Headquarters to talk about their tools for educators and the ways that we can, you know, further computer science in our schools. And certainly we're at a really interesting moment where there is a lot of kind of virtual schooling going on. But as we both know, using a device and writing code and mastery of programming are not the same thing.
that's
So
right.
there is a bit of a, yeah. And I know we've really appreciated that. And that was kind of getting into my next question. And I think it's pretty clear that because of this value that you've placed on those early experiences, mentorship and education specifically are pretty important to you, I would assume, based on that background.
You bet. And so we're seeing this in elementary schools now, where kids are getting exposed to not necessarily programming per se, or at least not as much as I would like. It's more like logical thinking with puzzle pieces and the concepts of loops and conditionals and control flow. But you know, like my son, he's in third grade, and they have this thing where you sort of make these people dance around on the screen, which is great. But I really want him to, you know, learn JavaScript. Like I want him to learn Swift or even, you know, Java, something like that.
Right.
And so what I'd like to eventually get to is a point where, come kind of late elementary, we're actually getting these kids familiar with syntax and something a little bit more than just sort of dragging and dropping puzzle pieces, because I do think they're different. The concepts are there, but I think fundamentally it's a different task.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, let's fast forward a little bit, you know, after your time, you know, getting your own education, you have spent some time then working for some pretty cutting edge, very interesting fintech companies. Take us a little bit through that journey. And then I'd like to kind of ask you about the transition to NBKC.
You bet. So, you know, came to Kansas City to work for Cerner Corporation, expected to sort of save some money and then move back to Chicago. Fell in love with the area, stayed here, got married, started a family, and then moved into a role at Perceptive Software. It was called Perceptive Software at the time, where started learning from leaders there and being promoted into a leadership role at that company, which eventually became Lexmark, et cetera. And then moving on from there to TradeBot Systems, where I was for 9 years, I think, and working under Dave Cummings, and that's really kind of where I was kind of pushed into more of a leadership role, but at the same, that's a very interesting organization because everybody's technical. So even the leaders are very, very hands-on, working from an implementation standpoint, working on everything. Even Dave himself, the CEO and founder. Learned a ton from TradeBot, but became kind of came into a position where I just felt like it was comfy, like I'd been there 9 years.
Yeah.
It was becoming sort of definitely not stale. Is anything but stale, but it was sort of safe in a way, and I felt like I needed to sort of test some boundaries, I guess, from like just am I capable of leading a team to the capacity like that a CTO would require, things like that. So that's kind of where I was as I was transitioning away from TradeBot.
So then you get, you are made aware of this really unique opening at NBKC. What are your first thoughts? How do you feel about, I'm considering something at a bank? What does that feel like? And kind of take me through that process, because as we know, NBKC isn't your typical bank, but how did that revelation kind of go for you?
Yeah, I think that, so at first it was like, I was having a lot of conversations with people, but certainly a bank was not one of the conversations I was having. And, but through a couple different means, became aware of this group, NBKC, and really was behaving more than just a bank, was also sort of providing a fintech accelerator, was involved in these startups, and was building a software team inside the bank, and so really to think of NBKC as just a bank is a little bit short-sighted, I think. And so I was like, okay, well, this is interesting. I mean, there's people that I trust that are talking highly of this organization. So I met some of the leadership, and it became clear that indeed their vision was very bold. They were very innovative. They're willing to put a lot of resources into the buildup of a development organization within the bank. And I think at the end of the day, what it came down to was NBKC. So I imagine most banks probably see an IT department in some building, somewhere, or some floor somewhere, but for the most part, people don't really speak to them. They're sort of mysterious, you ask for something, you never really know what you're going to get or when you're going to get it. So definitely not the case in NBKC. I think NBKC instead has positioned the software development team as an enabler for that innovation. And so, so we as a bank really rely on the development department to drive us forward, which is exactly what I was looking for. I did not want to be in a position where we were just a cost center. We were just something sort of hanging off the side we have to have this group around to sort of make our computers work. And so I wanted to be in something that was driving the organization forward. And it became clear that was the case here at NBKC. And the bank is just incredibly innovative. And I've worked at some companies over the years that are fairly innovative in and of themselves. And I would put NBKC right up there amongst, the TradeBots of the world, for instance, in terms of vision and in terms of the desire and ability to just go take down a huge vision.
Right. No, that's fascinating. And I think, I think it would be interesting too to kind of get into the specifics of what you're working on at NBKC and what your team, is doing. And I think now that we know a little bit about the kind of leader you are and how you got here, let's talk about what you're up to and shed some light on it. So what are your biggest priorities right now? For example, new features, solidifying existing code, implementing new products, making sure everyone is, on the Zoom call when they're supposed to be. What are those priorities right now?
Yeah, it's always a mix, right? So, we have infrastructure that atrophies over the years and needs attention. But generally speaking, our projects fall into sort of like two categories. One category being sort of the internal efficiency and automation of our processes in the bank. So making our staff as efficient as they can be, as precise as they can be, as correct as they can be through automation. and that could look like, making this third-party product talk with this third-party product. It could look like a series of API calls that completely remove something that used to be a manual step or whatever. Think about like the production process of a mortgage, for instance, is ripe with all kinds of things that can be automated, or underwriting a loan, a commercial loan, or something like that. But then we also have a series of projects that are much more sort of like forward thinking. So it's not just automating this manual task. It's how can we drive the customer experience to be truly unique for the NBKC customer? What is it that we can bring to market that maybe pulling a third party off the shelf and plugging it in just doesn't quite fit the bill? Like, we want to provide, let's say, the world-class experience for our mortgage customers, for our deposit customers, for our commercial lending customers, whatever. How are we going to provide that world-class experience? And then identifying little bits and pieces within there that are going to truly drive us toward that goal. So from a larger project perspective, for instance, we've built an onboarding process for our mortgage customers. We're in the process of building a significant platform that's going to enable us to build an onboarding and many different flavors of onboarding experiences for our deposit customers, things like that. And again, these sort of speak to things that NBKC is willing to take on internally, whereas most banks probably wouldn't, or at least community banks our size wouldn't. And we really view that as an advantage. So yeah, that's a flavor of, I guess, the types of projects we're working on.
Cool. So within some of those processes and the kind of two types of projects, are there any specific kind of qualities inherent to NBKC, your role, the configuration of that software team, that makes developing software there unique to the organization, that you think kind of puts you at an advantage versus maybe some other similar sized banks, regionally or otherwise?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the vision and where we see the team within the bank, and the fact that even from the top, it's recognized that our team is a very strategic piece to the overall goal of the bank. I talked a lot about our traditional software development, like in building projects, but we also have a lot of data analytics and data science happening as well. And we really see these things as stepping stones into the future, that if we want to stay in the lead lap of financial innovation, banking innovation, we have to have these things as core competencies. And so the fact that the bank has that vision is really what makes the difference. And we operate fairly autonomously as well. So the ability to sort of build out the team as almost an independent software engineering shop, within the four walls of the bank, puts us in a position where we can do some of these more aggressive or idea-oriented projects. I think that's a huge differentiator.
And I think that comes back to a philosophy at the top, just from leadership. You have to have leadership who, creates an environment for you to have the space to succeed, the, space to be innovative, the timeframes for projects to really take flight. And it sounds like that's really what you're benefiting from as well.
100%. Yeah. And again, it's a situation where if the leadership didn't have that vision and wasn't willing to be aggressive with it, then it's probably not a place that would have attracted me. I wanted to go take risks. I wanted to go push boundaries. I wanted to go see what we could do. And it feels great to have the support of CEO and my peers. And so, yeah, it's been a really great experience.
That's great. No, that's great. I think that's so indicative of the role that technology has really started to take in a lot of enterprise companies, especially those that wouldn't think of themselves as a tech company, but as years go by and as the magnitude of impact that technology has on the bottom line and pace of business, we're seeing that shift. Now, it doesn't always happen very quickly, and leaders who get it are operating at an advantage. So that's exciting to hear. So I want to kind of get specific more to your team, as you're working on building through that software development team. And this is kind of a particular question, but I have a feeling based on some of the questions I'm seeing in the Q&A that there are some folks who are aspiring, developers, folks who are interested in getting into the industry that are still kind of looking for those first couple roles to really give them that experience, that on-the-job experience. What do you think would be a realistic goal for a new employee to achieve in their first 90 to 120 days as a developer?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I guess really what I would say is it's partially on the team to figure out how to make a new hire successful. I would say even within the first 30 to 45 days, like to have something where we've got a project that is self-contained enough, it's sandboxed enough or whatever, that you can wrap your head around it in the span of a handful of days with some coaching. And by the end of, let's say, a 45-day time frame, 30-day time frame, we've got code that's gone through review, perhaps even deployed into production, depending on the scope. But not only does that kind of give a new hire a sort of cadence or momentum kind of going in early, but it also provides the team with some context around who they're dealing with here. So like, they've seen your code at this point. They've dealt with your questions. They've taught, they've provided you insight, things like that. And so if we can get that stuff kind of moving within the first sort of 30 to 45 days, it gives us a much better sort of footing on which to know where to go then. So if we're talking about, well, let's see, we've got this 3-month project, go work on this 3-month project. 3 months later, we may realize that we've completely missed the mark with what we need to teach or what the skill set is or whatever, or how we need to communicate. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it sounds like it's especially essential to front load that experience of that, 90 to 120 days and really make sure that it is and I would think that, gosh, operating remotely, it makes it even more essential to have that really critical communication set up between teammates and to help a new employee, feel like they're finding their footing and they have the tools to be successful and that everybody is on their side and wants them to be successful too. And that's a really important environment to create, especially in the strange circumstances that we're still operating in, and hopefully not for much longer, but it's the reality, certainly. How do you measure your team's success? And I know that that's kind of really depends on the metric, but what are maybe a couple of those metrics that are especially important to you and you wake up in the morning and think, we're nailing it because I know this is happening?
Yeah, it is hard to put quantifiable kind of metrics around things like that. But I do think, look, if we're not delivering product, then we're not succeeding as a team. And so for me, it's about delivery and it's about quality as well. So it's like, so if we look back at a year or we look back at a 2-year span or even a 6-month span or something like that, and we can't point to a handful of things that we've delivered to the bank that makes the bank better off, then we're probably headed down the wrong path, or we're wallowing in some kind of a design conundrum or an architecture conundrum or something like that. And so every once in a while you have to kind of pick your head up and see what you've actually delivered to the bank. Now that doesn't mean go fast. It doesn't mean cut corners. It doesn't mean like forget about design and architecture, because those things are actually very important from a quality perspective. And they are what provide the footing for you to then deliver further and faster in the future. So those things are very, very important. But we can't just completely forget about the delivery side because we're trying to build this amazing design or something like that.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's so I would measure it in terms of product delivered and then the quality of that product.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and I think those are kind of two different experiences for developers too. I mean, you really have the opportunity to kind of sink your teeth in, but then everything has to be rooted in the reality of what the business needs are. Mm-hmm. And I think a good leader is pretty good at, making those lenses apparent to everyone. I think I always feel like when a really good CTO not only embraces the, technological magic of what they're doing, but also make sure everyone on their team is really aware of how this magic fits into the business objective that they are working toward. Do you find that makes a pretty big difference?
100% agree. Yeah. And that's kind of one of the things that I really like to see in employees is that click. So it's not just about getting code down that works, that solves a problem, but it's seeing how that fits into the greater problem set of the business. Right. And you're right, it's partially on me to explain that. We rely on our product manager to help explain that. We rely on our business leaders to help explain that. But at the end of the day, if we can't really see how it fits into that whole product suite, if you will, then it becomes becomes another function. It becomes another method in 1,000 others. And it's the little decisions around edge cases get influenced by that overall context. And we'll be so much better off if we are making decisions in the context of the greater problem and the greater sort of environment in which that product fits. So yeah, 100% agree with that.
Yeah, and you're steering away from just development for development's sake.
Right, that's right.
That kind of gets into the next section of questions. And for those of you, we've got a few that have come in already from our attendees that look really great. And I will make sure to get to all of these. I've got a few more questions for Scott. I'll give you a quick warning when I get to the very last one. But do submit those questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them. So I'd love to talk about kind of specifically what you're looking for. This is a conversation that's preceding a hiring fair that happens next week that NBKC is hosting virtually with a terrific virtual partner that actually Tech Council's done some events with. So we're really thrilled to have this opportunity present itself there's a lot of talent out there right now that's either looking or there's been some displacement. Thankfully, tech hasn't seen the huge amount of displacement that other industries have, but there's good talent out there. And I'm sure there's folks that would be really interested in your answers to these questions. So what are some of the most, and you kind of touched on this with the viewing of understanding the business case and the technology that goes along with it, but what are some of those other really common characteristics? And this is both work style or just personal characteristics that NBKC and you look for in top tech talent.
Yeah, I think, in some of these I've touched on already around this sort of like dialogue-oriented approach to problem solving. So communication is huge. So the ability to not only have an idea, but to articulate it well and articulate it precisely. The idea could be very strange or something that maybe doesn't work. But that's really not what we're really interested in is do you have ideas and then can you articulate those ideas clearly? I think that's an important thing that some of our best performers have that. And that kind of goes on the other side too, not just sort of delivering your ideas, but also giving feedback on the ideas of others, to have tact, to have empathy, sort of a way to view others' ideas as being perhaps better than your own, and being able to accept that, so there's a bit of humility there. So those are kind of like sort of softer skills, but very, very important. I really really like enthusiasm, so a sense of energy when someone's around in the office, to have kind of like this idea that, like when I was writing a lot of code, there were times where I was just like on the edge of my seat, just working, the clock just disappears. And it's that kind of enthusiasm toward the product that I really value. So there's that, I think, and then at the end of the day, we expect a certain aptitude around the sort of the business of engineering. So building software requires a certain amount of knowledge. And so it's not that everything, certainly that's not a requirement, but to look at maybe your experiences and see, did you learn, and then did you retain what you learned from those experiences? And not just like, well, someone told me to do X, and so I did it. And then I got this other project, and it was Y, and so I did Y, I built Y, and Y was great. But like, what was the thought process behind building Y? What were the decision points in there? Talk about, sort of the origin story of Y, and then that usually demonstrates whether or not the concepts are there. So for our best performers, it's communication. There's a sense of having a posture of a teacher at times, and then being able to articulate concepts that aren't always easy to retain or articulate. So there's that aptitude piece there.
Yeah. This next one you've touched on a bit, but I'm sure there's maybe we can go a little bit deeper on this, because I think it's a very buzzy word in tech, and that's culture. But I'll tell you, Tech Council, we did a couple survey type studies with CEOs of our companies that invest in us, or after the pandemic and some of the challenges of working remote really set in. And one of the things we asked them, and one of the real core reasons we put out this study, was we really wanted to dig into, what are you worried about? What are the things that are inherent to your business that concerns you? Is this getting new customers? Is this cash flow? Is this, there was a number of different options on the table. And the number one thing that was most cited as the biggest concern, and this surprised us, was retaining and keeping their culture alive within their organizations. And I think, that really goes to show how significant that is, both in terms of productivity, but also retention, recruitment. I mean, it all is rooted in that magical word of culture. So when you think of culture on your team and on the technology, team at NBKC, what do you look for in terms of a really good culture fit on that team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because especially on a growing team, culture can evolve too. And so, if you think about culture being sort of the sum of the dispositions, the ideas, the conversation, the thoughts of a group, and then you change that group, it can shift culture. So it's a big thing to try to provide guardrails around, or to provide some sort of direction or structure around. And I think it works best when it's self-driven by the organization itself. So that I often rely on my team to develop some of their own culture, right? And I try to not be at every virtual happy hour or every things like this. So I don't, because I don't want to be that influence every single time. But at the same time, I want to encourage those things to happen. I want people to be not just coworkers, but also friends, and have a thread of friendship and just sort of mutual understanding that runs through the team. Those things are very, very important, and you don't get those by just by decree. You don't get those outcomes.
It's not a top-down thing. Yeah.
It absolutely is not. So And so, like you said, it kind of comes back to that sort of enthusiasm, a posture of having an openness, an open mind, right, and a bit of humility. I think that those things allow that culture to really make a foothold, I guess, in a team, and credit NBKC as well as a bank. So that's kind of my team, but as a bank, the bank has really put a lot of effort, especially in the past 10 months or whatever, into building a culture that can sustain this type of disruption, right? And we're all kind of just sort of rolling with the punches here, and we have been for a while, but for NBKC to have really put that front and center, and to have gone the extra mile to try to retain that culture, the culture that we pride ourselves in, even as we're remote, is pretty honorable.
Yeah, no, that's I think it is. It all goes back to being a good fit within the leadership, and how leadership views, the importance of different things. And that is great. And you should be at all the happy hours. You're a good happy hour buddy.
Okay, well, I'll take your advice on that.
All right. No, I've got one more question for you that we've prepared, and then I've got several to dig into here that we've already received, which is really great. But please keep sending them in. I think we do have time to get hopefully to a couple more if they're sent in here. So this is kind of the core question, I think, that people are probably wanting to know, especially as they get ready for next week, as they prepare to engage at that career fair. So how does one get their foot in the door to a best place to work, as NBKC is often cited? What does that process look like, and what are some of the really great ways to get that foot into the door?
Yeah, so I mean, the obvious thing is really looking at our job postings, and I think we've got a few out there for the development team in particular, both on the data oriented data science side, as well as the software, sort of traditional software development side. So like, I can get really tactful here and talk about like resume cleanliness and things like that. I think that the right sort of approach, though, is to be forward. Like, hey, look, I really want to work, not just I don't just want a job. I want to work at NBKC because I've seen NBKC be noted as one of the best places to work year after year after year in Kansas City, and that's interesting to me. Or I'm interested in working for your software development team because I hear you guys are doing great things. I saw this write up, or I saw this post on LinkedIn or whatever. And those types of things I think go a long way, because it adds a little bit of context to the ask, right? It's not just I sent out a dozen resumes and just to see where I could get a bite. So those types of things are interesting to us. I think that also we've got a good amount of information on our job postings that candidates can do a little bit of extra research into some of those bullet points and come prepared with some additional knowledge, right? And it's not just like cramming for a test, but it's curiosity. It's like, oh, I see you guys talk about this design process, or I see you use this technology. Tell me about that. Like, this is the interviewee saying this to the interviewer. I'm curious about how you're doing this or that. Those types of things indicate that your interest is a little bit more than just dropped a bunch of resumes.
Right. Yeah, it kind of goes back to what you said early on in our conversation, that the enthusiasm is such an important quality for you. And I think being enthusiastic and curious, one of your core traits too, it bodes well. It creates good conversations. You learn more authentic information about an organization that you're interested in working for. And that, that's true of a technology role or any role. But I think, I think those are really important things to keep in mind. Well, I'm going to go into some of these questions that we've received from our audience. Please keep sending these in as we get through these, guys. But this is from an anonymous attendee, so it's exciting. It's a great question. What skills or qualities do you think are needed in technical individuals who are interested in moving into leadership roles? Gosh, that's something we hear a lot at the Tech Council. Something that we're pretty passionate about is creating tomorrow's leadership, layer in this industry. And it's something that you kind of personally have been through, just within the last decade or so.
Yeah, great question. I think that for me, the number one thing is developing trust. I mean, so as you want more responsibility and are interested in accepting more and having someone give you more responsibility, you have to prove that you're trustworthy and that with that responsibility, you will make good decisions, or at least well-reasoned decisions. And for me, that's huge. So there's like sort of like this, this rope, and you sort of get more and more rope as you prove that you think through problems the right way. You're bringing problems to the surface that need to be brought to the surface. You're taking your time, right, on problems that need to be well thought through and designed properly, and not just going with your gut instinct. And so these things all kind of start to instill trust, and then it becomes a situation where maybe you're leading out with a new hire and you're tasked with training, right? And then it becomes more about leading a project, and then it becomes maybe some formal designation of leadership within the team. But for me, it all comes down to that building up of trust through, showing that you have these ideas, showing that you're diligent about seeing those ideas through, careful, right? Those types of things.
Are you somebody who's kind of thought a couple positions ahead, or like where you kind of want this to go into? Is that something you've kind of done in your career?
Like, I really love writing software, like writing code. So I've never been motivated to get out of that.
Yeah.
So I think, for me, the answer really is no. I do know that I've wanted to push boundaries, and I've wanted to extend, not really extend my influence, but extend my risk tolerance. And so as that has happened, it's been kind of more in the leadership realm. But I mean, I still write a lot of code, and I love writing code. And so for me, like, my next job might be just, I'm doing some data science stuff somewhere or whatever, if NBKC decides to fire me. So like, for me, I'm not really motivated necessarily by career trajectory or titles. It's really more about trial and error, pushing boundaries, seeing where my boundaries are, testing different, limitations and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's such an authentic motivation for a role. I mean, it's your love for the technology parts of it, not your bloodthirsty hunger for all-consuming power, which is really great to hear.
Yeah, I hope not.
No, certainly not. No, that's really cool. And I think that makes for a pretty good leader in this space too, as somebody who is as enthusiastic about what his team is doing as the team. So that's pretty cool. So this question comes from Peter, and I think it's one that we hear a lot as well. I mean, these are finding that pathway into this field can be challenging and can take a lot of different pathways. I mean, I know that no two entries into the tech industry look quite alike. So Peter's wondering what advice you would give to someone like him who didn't go through a traditional computer science education, which is very common, but want to excel in the industry. He's had a boot camp education and 1 year of professional experience, and then COVID happened, and that can certainly be, a challenge as well. What is some advice you would give to Peter and those that are following a similar path?
Yeah, good question. And in fact, we have a lot of team members, majority of our team members that are major contributors here at NBKC did not follow the traditional computer science 4-year degree pathway. So there is definitely room. I think that one thing that's common about the guys that have succeeded on our team is that there's a distinct level of understanding of the content and the material that is beyond what you'll pick up in a boot camp or some kind of a very sort of quick certification. And then further, there's a hunger to learn more. So if it's a surface level understanding of the content, it becomes a little less interesting to us, and we can detect that, in an interview process or whatever. But if you've proven that you have a sense of why things are built the way they are, or how things work behind the scenes, then that indicates to us that not only have you learned that other stuff, you've retained it and you've internalized it, and it has the potential then to affect the way that you make decisions. So as you're writing code, we can't be looking over your shoulder the entire time. We want to know that the basis of those decisions are rooted in something more than just, I did this project for a boot camp, or I can remember my teacher saying something about this, and so I'll try to use that here or whatever. There has to be this understanding. So in terms of practical advice, I think that sort of take what you learned at a boot camp, or through even like a technical degree or whatever, and then just dive deeper on every single column. If there's a bunch of boxes that are checked, I learned this thing, dive deep on every single one as best you can, and build up that knowledge, so that it's more than just a checkbox. It becomes a little bit more of it's a foundational, sort of base from which you make decisions, and people like us will be impressed.
Is there a way to indicate that, ahead of time? Because I know all too often it's a resume, and you can kind of surmise experience or what, the hard and kind of facts of how somebody has gotten, to noticing this position and throwing their hat in the ring. Are there ways to sort of indicate that depth of understanding before the interview process, or, that they can get to that point where they can really prove themselves in that level of interest?
It's hard on paper to indicate that base of knowledge. Really that comes through in conversation primarily. Sometimes we can see it in specific projects, like projects that maybe weren't assigned, but that were just, special interests of the individual, of the candidate. So yeah, sometimes it comes through in projects, but it's difficult, and so we'll never make a sort of a decision that this person doesn't understand the content based on a resume, right? We understand that stuff has to come through in a conversation. And so if there's, sufficient number of boxes are checked, benefit of the doubt, we'll get them in front of, get them in a phone screen, or get them in front of on a video chat or something like that, and try to get at some of those other foundational principles.
Sure. And at that point, it can become pretty apparent.
Yeah.
All right. I've got another question for you from our audience. Oh, this one's from Narasimha Gandhi. Hi, Gandhi. It's been a while. He's with OTSI. So, Scott, are you using any software tools for DevOps and QA automation?
Yeah, so I would say, so on the DevOps side, so we stick to kind of a Microsoft stack. So Microsoft's Azure DevOps suite of tools we use fairly heavily. And so everything from the code repository to production deploys to, a host of things there, including project tracking and all that. And then on the QA side, we are getting to the point where we're starting to automate a fair amount. And so there is some tooling that we're bringing online there. It's sort of in its infant stages right now, but I would expect, this time next year, it's an entirely different conversation, and we've got a bunch of that in place.
Awesome. This is the last question I've received to this point. So we'll conclude, and I like concluding on this because it's forward looking and something that we know is a very significant emerging role for the tech industry, and for that's CTOs are really paying attention to specifically. So what role do you see data playing in NBKC's future? I'm sure it plays a role in the present, but where do you, when you're looking at how to harness and harvest and learn from your data, where do you see that going without giving away too many trade secrets?
Yeah. Well, so this is the whole, this is where I spend most of my time these days, honestly, is on our thinking about our data infrastructure and thinking about strategy around our data infrastructure and the insight that we're getting out of our data. How do we use our data in effective ways? This one's huge. And to me, I think that NBKC is well on its way in a path toward just amazing success in this space. So we believe that the way that we speak to customers can completely be changed based on what we know about them. And it's not in a creepy way, not like we're buying data about you, but just through your when you came to the bank and by what means and what your balances show us or your interaction with our lending organization. And also sort of like, if we believe a model customer sort of looks like this, how can we pull people along toward that image of a model customer down that path, if you will, and so pulling those strategies off requires a fair amount of detailed decision making around how we're storing data and how we're combining data from different sources, and all things in those realms. So right now, in just very practical terms, we're building out our prowess in Python programming and using pandas, using NumPy, using matplotlib, using Jupyter notebooks, using all the things that people will use in kind of the data science organization, and because we believe that data science capacity is very important for us for our success in the future. I don't like the idea of trying to pull in someone from outside of our four walls and sort of buying their off-the-shelf insights. These are things that we want to develop internally, and I think it gives us a strategic advantage to do so. So huge strategy for us, and something that we've invested a lot in already.
That's exciting. Yeah, I think it's certainly the future of a lot of the industries that technology enables, and certainly the financial industry is a very, very significant example of that. Mm-hmm. Well, with that, I think we're nearing our time here at the hour. And this has been such a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to you, Scott.
Likewise.
You usually ask me really good questions, so this has been really fun for me to get to ask you really good questions. And thank you to our friends at NBKC who helped with those questions, and to our team at KC Tech Council for helping to pull the logistics of this conversation together. So before I let everyone go, I do want to just quickly remind you that NBKC's Career Fair happens next week. It is on Wednesday, the 18th of November, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. If you didn't get a chance to ask all the questions that were on your mind today, you will have plenty of opportunity to speak to a lot of the really bright and awesome professionals at NBKC as you pursue the open opportunities that they have on their team. And I don't know that after hearing Scott's passion and excitement for the work that he does, it sounds like a pretty great team to join. So we do hope that you make it to that career fair. And we're always excited to support our friends at NBKC. So thank you all for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.